Hello. Good evening. This is the talk User Experience and Interface Design for Map Apps. I think we can get started. My name is Gaigg, and I work in professional services where I lead the UI engineering team, and my job is to create compelling and easy to use and useful applications. Let me tell you a quick story. I'm originally from Austria, a small but beautiful country in the heart of the Alps. My granddad was a carpenter. He learned his craft as an apprentice in a local shop before he was able to go on and open his own shop. He became the house carpenter of a company called Philips, where he built custom furniture for his employees. He also built his own house from the ground up. He built everything. He built the floors, the ceilings, the furniture. And I remember vividly all the many times that we sat around this big table in the living room, playing cards, laughing, talking, discussing. When I decided that I wanted to study computer science, I told my grandma, and she replied, "Oh, I don't believe in that." Almost as if it was like a religion or something. And my granddad continued to tell me that people don't know how to produce the same quality as they used to anymore. I often felt offended by what he said. I never understood why he would say that, since nowadays we have better tools, better machines, better processes, better knowledge. I just couldn't understand it. It was only until he passed away and I came back to the house and I saw all the furniture that he did with all these old-fashioned woods and ornaments. That's when I realized that there are two types of people in this world. There are builders that create things, and there are users that use those things. My granddad, he knew exactly for who he built the furniture. And I can still see the soul of my grandparents in them. I started to understand what he was trying to tell me all this time. We don't produce the same quality anymore because the builders nowadays, they don't know their users anymore. They're detached. This is Salzburg. That's the city I grew up in. It's a beautiful Baroque city with Romanesque, Gothic, and Renaissance influences. You can follow the tunes of Sound of Music and visit the birthhouse of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And as you continue walking through the tiny streets of Old Town, you start seeing all those signs hanging over the streets from the stores advertising the services and goods. These signs, they had a function. At a time when literacy was low, a shoe, a key, an M, well, maybe an M not so much, but they all had a meaning. They communicated something. We say form follows function, and we actually believe in that. But it's not true, because form is a function. So if my story can teach you two things, then it would be: one, get to know your user. Go out, talk with them, get to know them. And two, be authentic. Don't worry about removing all the ornaments and just to be shiny and clean like Apple or Bauhaus. Just be yourself. You don't need to be timeless. So I want you to go home with a couple of things in your bag. And just so you don't get distracted, we collected all the materials and references. Under one link, you go to michaelgaigg.com/blog, and you will find all the materials from this blog. You can also follow us on @michaelgaigg and @al_Laframboise on Twitter, where we are going to tweet about those things. Snap a quick picture. So let's start with a design challenge one sheet. Ready? Imagine this situation. You've been given an existing app with a request to make it a model GIS that is modern, highly polished, professional looking, easy to use, and mobile friendly. Sounds familiar? So as we talked with our client, they tell us that the current pain points are difficult to understand, can't find stuff, UI not obvious. The users are citizens that want to look up pretty much anything. Realtors that are interested in zoning, evacuation zones, road ownership. Mortgage underwriters, pretty much the rest of the world. And naturally internal staff that do all of the above. So the question is, should we create one app, which we actually already have and we already saw failing, or should we create 35 focus apps using Web App Builder? So what to do? Where to start? Do you accept the design challenge? So let's use my cheat sheet. It's just a piece of paper, you draw some lines and you have 4 sections. I wanted to call them PET, problem, expertise, tasks, but kind of didn't fit. So the top section is expertise and experience. Then there's the problem section, and then there's tasks, and then there's room for scribbles and doodles. So in our first section, we ask questions like, what are the pain points? This actually might require some research. We ask, what are the desired outcomes? And that's very different to the output, to what you're going to deliver. It's about what do you want the outcome to be? We ask about the goals and the strategy and how to measure it. All these things is typically something that you know or that your clients know. And that's what I just described before. And whenever I feel lost during a walkthrough, a demo, or a sales presentation, I remember to ask one thing, and that's the single most important question. What is the problem we're trying to solve? We also need to understand the business needs and the end user needs, and this requires a lot of talking with subject matter experts and real users. So in the case of Bay County, we were actually able to identify our problem, which was common across all the user groups, and it was to make informed decisions about a parcel or property and its surroundings. The better we understand the problem, the more focused we can define our tasks. We ask when, who, what, and why. And I recommend, typically you formulate those as user stories, but I recommend to use a similar structure, but slightly different, starting with when. For example, when a new resident tries to purchase a house, they need to first understand the property and its neighborhood. This adds crucial information about the context, the when, and the purpose, the why. We're not so worried about the how at this time yet. All right, by now you're probably wondering what happened to our app. So here it is. So we trimmed down the application to the bare bones. We only have a unified search, a legend, and a drawer navigation. Our assumption was that people are used to searching. And as the user starts typing, we return the results from multiple layers, and depending on the type of result clicked, we kick the user into its appropriate workflow. So in the case of an address, we show, for example, the details of the property, and we allow the user to start analyzing its surroundings. Sounds familiar? It's more or less what I just mentioned before, right? So we can now select 3-mile radius, and we have all this information. And that's pretty much all the user needs. We are ready, they can print or export the data. Tucked away in the drawer navigation, we have groups of layers that are meaningful with hopefully well-defined presets. It allows the user to toggle on only what they need, so the map is still clean, and then they can toggle to a different base map, and they're pretty much done. What about mobile? Well, kind of comes for free, right? So I know exactly what you're thinking right now. Let's say we won the design challenge. We have awesome wireframes. we know what to do. Would that guarantee us to create a good-looking app? Let's think about that for a moment. So this is the food compass for the US Department of Agriculture named Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. It allows the general public and potential applicants to a food program to explore existing programs of the USDA and any of their partners. So what's wrong with this app? Yet another one of these, right? I love my job. Well, so there's a couple of things wrong. So first of all, there's this big logo that is really not needed. Then there's this big description that we know nobody reads. We have in a very prominent location, a base map gallery that I personally don't understand why it exists, because if I, as the author, don't know which base map to use to perfectly highlight my data, then who should know? We have 3 different kinds of searches. We have a map. And actually that was one of the pain points that the client told us from the get-go. They said, so we have this, they call it a fire hose of data. I'd rather call it like a tsunami of data. And then there's this layer list / legend on the side that reminds me of ArcGIS on the web. So what can we do about it? So this was the old version. We did our homework. We developed a UX strategy. We did a concept, wireframes, and we implemented a new site. So as you can see, we removed the multiple searches. We have one unified search. We have a clear call to action, which we called Explore Funding. We changed the map type from showing points from the get-go, and now we're showing a thematic corblet map. We removed the logo. Unfortunately, we got pushback on the text. They still wanted that, which is really unfortunate because now important content is below the fold, so you cannot actually see it. And we thought it was a pretty well-defined application. We made good progress. Would you think so? Yeah? Well, definitely we felt really good about it. After a year, we had the chance and the pleasure to work with USDA again. So they approached us and asked us to help us with iteration 2. So we had the opportunity not only to improve some of the workflows, but also to improve the looks. Here's how version 2 looks. So the user experience hasn't changed too much. We introduced a side panel on the map where we moved some of the layer information, which yet again you cannot see underneath version 1, to the side panel. And we moved the legend out so it's more visible and clear what we show on the map. Selecting California, here we'll zoom to the state and start showing the actual data. And you see how the layers and legend that we had on the original version now became some sort of dashboard. So by show of hands, which version do you like better? Who likes version 1? Who likes version 2? Okay, thank you. Which is a really funny question. I looked at these a lot of times, and I didn't understand why we couldn't do it right the first time, right? What was missing? And maybe you can tell me. Send me your comments, just tweet me, what do you think? Why is version 2 better? I mean, you all raised your hands and you said version 2 is better, or maybe one was said version 1. Why? Well, for one, I think in the first version, we were struggling to just get functionality done, right? And as you can see, the UX hasn't changed too much between versions. And I think what we did in version 1, we tried to fit in. We got the styles, and we implemented the styles according to spec. All the buttons blue, all the headers dark blue. And in version 2, we were able to give it a fresh look and to break free. So actually, kudos to our client for revisiting the app. And that's why it's really important to iterate. It's also really important to innovate. And I'm really excited to show you this application. And that's one of the rare occasions when I can show and you can see an enterprise map application. That's an app we did for Gaigg Carpenter called Advantage Point. Gaigg Carpenter is a big reinsurance company, so they sell insurances to insurance companies. All the data that you're seeing is mock sample data, by the way. The app uses tabs to tailor to different target audiences, and not every user sees every tab. So for now, let's assume that I'm an internal analyst and I want to see how catastrophic events affect my portfolio of policies. As you can see, there's a legend, which is key to understanding the data, and therefore it's in a very prominent location in the top left corner. And we can visualize the data in different ways, by location, using a heat map, as a hex grid, or by political boundary like states. And the metrics I'm showing is TRV, which is total insured value. So when I go to the Events tab, I can add a catastrophic event, in this case a historic event. I'm choosing Superstorm Sandy, and I can see how this storm affects my portfolio. Let's zoom in a little further. Let's change the metric to annual average loss, and you will see how the cartography changes from blue to red, because now we are talking about loss. The info window is really important here, because the info window is the primary way of a user interacting with the application. Because the application doesn't know what the user wants, we have a little drop down where they can select what they want to interact with. In this case, I've drawn a little lasso shape, and I can add this shape to the filter, and now I'm only seeing those counties that are part of the filter. And if I click again, I can change from map filter to, you can see, either Superstorm Sandy or county layer. If I select county layer, I have contextual buttons that change based on my selection. In this case, I could start underwriting the county, and I always see the statistics based on my selection. And I can jump right into my workflows. So let's talk about what we can do to make better apps. And one way is to use common user interface patterns. The UI patterns, I think, are the closest you can get to best practices. They describe solutions to common design problems. And on this site, designingmapinterfaces.com, I'm collecting and curating patterns I encounter on a daily basis. UI patterns give you a common language. And it's easy to say, let's use breadcrumbs. Everybody knows what breadcrumbs are. Or how about we add a swipe tool? It's important to know what's the problem a swipe tool is trying to solve, and what's the solution, and when to use this pattern. And more important, when to not use this pattern. Because a swipe tool, hey, it comes for free, right? Let's just add it. Maybe not. So let's talk first about some general user experience patterns. Let's start with the desert fog problem. It tries to solve the problem that it's really easy in multi-scale systems to get lost. And to prove you that, I have a little quiz. So you're seeing the satellite image of the 11th largest city in the US by area. Anybody knows which city that is? Let's change the base map. Let's add an overview map. It is the third largest city in California. Let's add some place marks and a home button, because we already got lost. We need to get back. We need some navigation. Let's zoom in a little. You see the street network, and toggle the base map again. Okay, if you still don't know, it's beautiful California City, California, with a population of almost 15,000. It's true, you can Google. So what's the solution? Provide clear and legible labels. Some people might have be able to read the little California City label on the base map after I changed it. Add landmarks or natural features. and use other patterns like home button or an overview map. The next pattern is the data ink ratio. And what's the problem? Sometimes large share of ink or pixels is used for something that is not relevant for the task. Let's use this application as an example. We did for to find your representative, like a senator or a committee. And as you can see, we have a map with a large area that is really useful. I don't know, what is this? It's a beautiful country. What's the name? So it's definitely not important for the task on hand. So the better approach would be to remove it. How can we remove it? For example, by using an alternative base map, which is called the media base map. And again, all those links and references are part of the link that I gave you originally, so you can look it up. What we did is this alternative base map moves Alaska and Hawaii closer to the mainland, so we can actually represent it. We also changed the symbology, the cartography, so it matches the overall look and feel of the application. And it seems to fit better. So what's the solution? You can increase the data ink ratio by using alternative base maps or UI patterns like place marks that allows you to zoom to predefined extents like Hawaii, Puerto Rico, so you don't have to show everything at once. Let's talk about layouts real quick. There are essentially 4 types of layouts: full map, partial map, reference map, and no map. A full map is where the map is the focus of the application and it's the core value. You've seen it in Bay County. A partial map is when the map and the content is equally important, but you typically have a side panel that holds the content and allows the user to work through the tasks. It's workflow driven. A reference map can be used for navigation, but exists mostly only for reference purposes. It has limited interaction and is auxiliary to the content. And here's an example of community maps we did some while back. And this application uses a review server and other GIS technology to check and report uploaded data quality. And it doesn't have map, but it still uses or utilizes the full power of GIS. But just because we have an application without a map doesn't mean that we cannot get to a map. So there are actually 2 links that after clicking on a link will still let the user navigate to a map. It's just that the map is not up front. The other way around is true too. We can toggle between a full map application and a reference map. So for example, here's the Hawaii Department of Education that shows all the schools. And after clicking on a school, I can select show details in the info window, which opens up a modal window with the details about the school and a little reference map in the corner. And we actually produced this reference map using a print task. So just because you chose one layout type doesn't mean that you're stuck. So let me talk about mobile real quick. There's really no partial map on mobile for the simple reason that once you have a map, you have this slippery effect while you're trying to scroll the page. Well, actually you're just panning the map. So it's better to toggle between the reference map and a full map. I show you a short video. You will see that there's a list of things. After clicking on one of those items, you go to the details of this item. And this item has a reference map. It cannot be used for navigation. But as you click on a map, you activate the map and it becomes a full map. And now you have the live map. So let's see that again real quick. So in summary, here are the 3 map types. We typically prefer the partial map for the simple reason that it allows us to be workflow driven and to embed tools, map tools into the workflows. And I think there's one important caveat. It's really important that you focus on cartography. We work a lot with our cartography lab. just because the map is still so important. There are two more patterns I'd like to mention about visualization. The first one is the flow map. And the problem here is that we're trying to illustrate connection between points. For example, supply chains of a depot and the goods that flow to the depot, or travel patterns. And classic line connections or geodesic lines, they have some visual limitations. So how can we work around this? So conventional lines, they really easily get messy, even though this submarine cable map is a really elegant solution by running some of the lines in parallel so they don't overlap, and it actually looks really nice. Another alternative is the, sorry about the animation here, the leaflet migration layer. Imagine the point where all the arrows start flowing out being Los Angeles, and all the other dots are the cities in the US. And this might actually work really well for flights, but you have to be really careful because this could easily be taken wrongly, understood wrongly, like Los Angeles trying to nuke all the US, or Syria is trying to nuke the world or something if you show migration patterns. Yet another alternative would be the canvas flow map layer, which is a really nice and refreshing alternative. It's a recent development by Sarah Bell from our cartography lab and Jacob Wasilkowski from our dev team. And it uses Bezier curves and subtle symbology and animation to show the flow. Bezier. So check out the demo site. So what's the solution? Map connections using directional Bezier curves, add animation, and label start and end points. Well, we all know base maps. Base maps, they give users geographic reference to the information that is displayed on top of them. But what is really interesting is this lesson, and that's kind of cool for all you vector tile peeps out there, that we ran through in a recent project, which was led by Billy Leff from our cartography lab. She started thinking about colors for a custom base map for Abu Dhabi. And what comes to mind are obviously all those brownish pastel colors, maybe mixed with some greenish colors. And this actually looks really nice, and it works really well at larger scales. So what we've learned is that people in the Middle East, they perceive cities as cool and refreshing oases that should be represented in blue. So combined with the grayish color palette of the client, the base map at a larger scale looks dramatically different. See how we used graduated colors and how we highlighted these high-rise buildings in the downtown area with darker blue colors. So always apply well-established cartographic rules, put yourself in the shoes of the target audience, and consider the operational data that will show up on top of the base map. So let's talk a little about the total user experience. How you call it? The ultimate user experience. So what do I mean by that? So for me, the total user experience is not only thinking about what happens during the event, like this little pie slice during, but also to consider what happens before and what happens after. So picture this scene. I'm sitting at home, Friday night, we're sitting at table, my family and I, we're eating dinner, I'm thinking of having some beers and sleeping in, and my wife asks me to plan a hiking trip for the weekend. Right, so there's like this little frowning face. So I go online, I start checking if I find some trails, and I do find some, but I'm not sure which one to choose. Should I choose trail A or trail B, right? So now I'm getting frustrated. I mean, what to do? Well, anyways, I get over it, I choose one, we go, everybody's happy, we arrive at the trailhead, we start hiking, maybe I hit a little roadblock. I don't know, should I turn left, right? I don't know. Anyways, we arrive at, we had a great hike. We come back to the car, we eat the remaining snacks. The day is over, we're driving home, kids are sleeping, wife is happy checking her Facebook. And suddenly she asked me to plan the next trip. Okay, so again, another frowning smile, right? So what we have here is we have at least 3 moments in this application where we could potentially turn this frowning smile into a happy smile. And that's maybe something where we could help, where we as the application developer could help. So for example, how could we help the user decide on a trail before they actually go? And we know from apps like Airbnb how important it is that to have comments and feedback and pictures, and maybe a cool application where you can visualize something up front before you go. So could we build this application? And the German company Conterra, which is part of the Esri Germany group, thinks yes. They recognize that depending on the situation, the user might need different input mechanisms. And they developed a suite of apps that utilizes, for example, a watch to capture points of interest, which actually makes sense when you think about it. While you're horseback riding, it's kind of difficult to pull out your cell phone, right? Or while you're biking. So you could click on this little record button. You could say, well, this is a really cool site. And then maybe optionally you can open your phone. Or once you arrive at the restaurant, maybe now you pull out your phone. You have your points of interest that you've collected. Maybe you select a point of interest, give it a better name, description, and maybe you can select a type of point of interest. And then once you come home, you have an application where you have stats about the routes. Maybe you can use this application before you actually go to make a better decision, to see all the trails. Or maybe you can actually consume all the data that people used across the platform. So I guess it's your turn, right? Do you want to do a little demo?
Sure. Okay, so since we're talking about patterns and things like that with respect to designing and developing applications, I wanted to start here. It's a bit orthogonal, but it's still important. This was introduced at the plenary, and it's this data design develop pattern. This is a workflow we're promoting to build applications with the ArcGIS platform. So I wanted to leverage that and just itemize it again and step us through this process really quickly to try to help with the scenario that was just created for us by Michael here. So let's talk about data to start with. And data processing is a very important part of design, and it's often left out or left to some intermediate step before it's realized. So we're going to take data very seriously, and we're going to calculate the length, in this case, of the trails that have been provided to us. So that's sort of our data phase and preparation there. If we move on to the design phase, we're talking about cartographic design in this particular case. So what are some things that we can do to improve the cartography here? There's lots of things like just, obviously having the map zoomed in at the right level. In this case, we're using, we want to use, the requirement as an example is we want to use the topographic vector tiles because they draw really fast and nice and the labels render nicely. So we have that, but what I wanted to show you is a technique and a trick where we can use hillshade. So if we add hillshade as a base layer to the cartographic layer, then suddenly we have all of the benefits of the vector layer. And just to show you that how we can impact this map by influencing it with world hillshade, then you can see the difference in how the topography comes out. If we think about our end user, this is a much more meaningful app to somebody looking to do a hike through these mountains. In this case, it's in Durango, Colorado. So we're going to take sort of the mid step here by blending a little bit of world hillshade with one of the vector layers. And I think one of the important things that we often forget as map app developers, we are still cartographers at heart. And you can never forget that because it's the most meaningful, most impactful thing that the user is going to see, okay? So I wanted to show you how a small change can make a large difference. Some other things here too, very simple. We just applied a renderer to the trails based on that length field that came from the data part of our workflow. So we can see the really long trails are red, and then the green ones down at the bottom are shorter. So that should be helpful. Another design thing that we can do for map styling is formatting the pop-ups. So I got rid of all of the fields. I think on so many maps that I look at and review, design review, they have a stack of fields I look at with the FID in there. Please don't add the FID. It doesn't mean anything to people. So we can remove fields, we can format it. The other thing that I'm doing here as part of this data design develop workflow is I'm preparing the map for the application developer. And I'm basically saving him lots of time because I'm formatting it so that he can just consume it in his application. Okay, so that's about it. Let's say we have some different options now. So we could be done. We could say, all right, this is our web map. I'm going to share this with the world and send the link out, and that's it. Depending on our user group, it probably wouldn't go over so well. So we can use the app templates. We've all done this before. I'm going to introduce a new one that you might not be familiar with. It's called Styler. This is called Map Styler, and it's a new ArcGIS 4.0, actually 4.3 now, API app template, and it works in 2D and 3D. So we'll look at the 2D version for now, and we'll just start configuring and see, well, let's see what kind of improvements we can make to this application. It's one of the funnest parts of Michael and my job is critiquing applications and seeing what kind of improvements you can make. Well, one of the things to do is just to change the title. It's free and it's easy and it takes no time. So I'll just change this to Durango Trail Finder. Really simple, and then give some motivation here, like explore the wonderful outdoors. Okay, so a little motivation for folks. We can show a pop-up on start if we want, like this little about dialog box that we have here, or panel. We can do a lot of things with colors. So let's just go down and we'll influence this. And depending on the organization, of course, we may influence this, the color of our backdrop and so forth. We'll pick blue here, and if we wanted to, we could add a little bit of opacity. If we want to really emphasize the map over and above the title. If we want, we can also move the nav bar down to the bottom and highly impact this application. So what we're saying at that point is that the title of the application might not be as important as the map and the mapping tools. So we'll save this out and just take a look at what we've designed so far. So we have an immediate call to action up here, and of course we can improve on that too. And then we have the title down at the bottom, and we have, these are all secondary controls at this point. The map is the absolute emphasis. The issue with this is that we are assuming that the user will touch and use the mapping app, because that's what we do. And that's a little bit of a false misnomer, because a lot of people will start with the Google approach where they just simply search. So we'll just show this application functionality with these small improvements, and let's just see how far we can get to picking an adequate trail for the weekend. So here's a trail. It's called Stevens Creek. It looks like it's 1.1 miles long, might be a little bit short. I think there's another one here. Here we go, 7.25 miles long. Potentially a good trail. As far as I can see, it looks nice, and that could be the end of our workflow. Now, is this the best total user experience we could bring to the table? Probably not. So we have all kinds of technology and choices at our fingertips here. So I'm just going to take that same framework that was used to build out that template and build this custom application. It has the same type of features, except some features that may be more conducive to the user who will use this application. For example, I have this enhanced search. So if I did a Google search and I found the Stevens Creek trail, I could just put in Stevens Creek and it finds that. And it doesn't look for Starbucks, it doesn't do anything else, it doesn't muddy the waters with other types of search. It's very specific to the data that's in front of us. So now we found the Stevens Creek, and this looks pretty good. It looks very similar to what we saw before, except we have this handy dandy little play button here. So if I kick off the play button, then I can virtually experience this trail, in this case, in 2 dimensions. So this is neat, and it's giving us the mileage counter here. And just for all the geogeeks in here, this is actually using the geometry engine on the client side to calculate all the line segments using the ArcGIS 4.3 API. So that's kind of fun. But is this the best we can do? Because remember, there's a lot on the line here. You've been tasked on a Friday night by your wife and the family to pick the perfect trail. And you're like, yeah, I think we can do 10 miles or 9 miles. It looks pretty good. So let's see if this application can help us out further. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change to 3D view. And we can play that back. And we notice a lot of things start happening, of course, right? So obviously we can see the geography change. We can see the terrain here. Another thing I can do to improve this map is to add more context. Why not make this a real-life application? Why don't I take you outdoors so you can experience this trail almost in real time? So now, when I reorient my map, and I zoom in a little bit more, and I just go through and I play this, I can see, oh, there's like 3, 4, 5 miles of ugly switchbacks at the beginning of this. Now, is my wife and are my family still happy with our experience? So this is interesting, and I may or may not be happy with this particular trail. So I could do a little bit more Google research, or I could click around on the map a little bit, and let's say I find this other trail called the Shark's Tooth, which sounds very inviting for the family. All right, so let's play through that experience and kind of see what it looks like. And it's a very aggressive name, but if we look at this hike, it actually heads through the pass, and the elevation change is actually less than 1,000 feet, despite the name. So this is just a case scenario where 3D is bringing an incredible experience, user experience, to the table. And I'll be the first person to say that 3D doesn't solve every problem out there. But when Michael and I were discussing this, this is actually a real-world task that we were talking about. It's a real-world project. Then I started building this out, and I realized that I think with a little bit more work here, 3D could be the best user experience to provide, in this case, to preview the trail, to pick the exact experience that you expect to have. And because of the framework this is built on, I wondered if I could make the application work out in the field as well. Getting back to the total user experience. So we're only really talking about the front end of the experience when we're on the couch, right? Now we're out in the field. Let's see if this can work for the user. So we'll put in, I think it was that Stevens Creek trail that we were interested in. So we can zoom in, we can find that trail, we can play along. Do we need the third dimension in this case? Probably not. If you're on a device have limited GPUs and support for WebGL and so forth. So maybe just 2D is fine. But what I can do is I can play my way along this trail. And I also have a locator button here. If I were to click that, it would find my GPS location, and it would be able to compare it to how far I was along the trail. So I don't even need a GPS. I can just kind of use this, to replace it as an example. So we wanted to take you through this real-world use case scenario to apply some of the principles that Michael described. There's a lot of lessons to be learned here. It's a very clean interface. The cartography is the center of the interface. We've shown how to improve the cartography with the base map. The UI is getting out of the way and letting the user accomplish the task at hand. So these are some of the lessons to learn. And we also changed the approach that we give the user, and that is by performing a search, more like a Google-based search, versus forcing them to touch the map and pick the trail, which of course is an option. And it's actually kind of a fun thing. I was spending countless hours just picking random trails, playing these back, and looking at the terrain in Durango. So not only is it fun, it's entertaining. And the thing is, every application you build, whether it's a product or not, I think of it as like the next Facebook. And that way you can position it that way in your mind to be the absolute best, most incredible user experience you can provide. Now, the bonus thing that I would tell you is that I just published this code about an hour ago on GitHub. So if you go to my Laframboise GitHub repository, it's called Durango Trail Finder. The live source code for this is all available. It's a little rough, but it's all there, and it's accessible. So a couple things to take away. We exercise this data design develop pattern. Go and check out some of these labs if you didn't get a chance to see them yet. Take a look at some of the design patterns that we exercised here. And then the link, of course, can we reshare that link with everyone just so to remind them? And then, of course, surveys. Please fill out the survey if you liked what we talked about today. And if you have questions, feel free to ask us any questions as well. So there's where you can get all of the reference and links to the things that were discussed today. So without further ado, thank you very much. I know it's getting late. We have a little bit of time for questions if anybody has questions. Please.
When I was first looking at it, I was thinking, man, I need to stay away from the green trees on the red trails. Learning about the color choices. Stay kind of playing around.
Yeah. So there are a couple of reasons for those color choices. In this case, it was so you could markedly see them in the audience. It was more so you could identify them and I could speak to them. I think like a darker brown or a medium brown to a set of yellows would be a very neutral color set to sit on top of the cartography. Satellite imagery is very difficult to overlay lines on top of because you run into every scenario from the light shades to the dark shades. But I've had a lot of success using yellow to brown shades in the middle. That way, the brown being the red, and then the yellow being the lighter and easier on the eye and easier to digest. It's just another suggestion, but yeah, good point. Thank you. Any other questions? Please.
Earlier you mentioned iterations, but something I found is that it's difficult to stop power users or even yourself, because you become used to the application as you build it, from believing that the next iteration is better simply because you were tired of the old one, or because you're used to the old one and it seems simple to you, though a new user may be driven away by complexities or additional symbology that you're adding. And it's something I don't have an answer to, and I don't necessarily expect you to, but I'm wondering if you've encountered that. Is it more of a project management type of thing where you just have to know your target audience and push back against?
The one thing I know is the user is always right. I'll lay that out on the line. Or whether they're right or not, if the user is happy, then that's what matters. So I've worked on a lot of designs, and there's even design work on this application that I did that I know probably wouldn't pass some usability studies. And in my view, I would look at what the user is saying, try to really understand the pain points that they're feeling, and then iterate on that with some usability testing.
Yeah, and so I can add on top of that. I guess your question was, how can we make sure that iterations don't just add on top? So you want to avoid scope creep, right? So the clear answer is, or the question is, if you had two designs, how can you decide which design is better? And typically the answer is, if you're able to take away elements and you can still do the same thing, then the easier one is better. But I think scientific approach would be that you define a clear strategy. As part of the strategy, you define your end user and business needs and metrics on how to measure them. And then you do usability testing and you measure those metrics. And then if the metrics improve, you're improving. If not, then not, right? So if it takes users longer to complete the task, then you made something worse. And typically it happens if you add on top of what you already have, and it's not necessary, and users get more easily confused. So I think the answer would be try to measure it, which also means define metrics on how to measure it, and then do usability testing while you're iterating.
Anything else? Okay, that's it. Enjoy your evening, and we'll see you around. Thank you.